assistant. I'll take a minute to tell the story. One day in my studio in Malakoff, a man walked in with a briefcase and a little bow tie and a white shirt. I said, what can I do for you, sir? He said, I'm looking for work. I'm an assistant, a sculptor's assistant. Ah, I said. Well, it so happened that at that time I was starting on my very first project with hammered copper and stainless steel. I don't have pictures of it here, but I had no idea how to do it. In fact, I had gotten the commission by doing little balsa things, but that's one way I've always moved forward, is I get jobs to do that I don't know how to do, and I find out how to do them. And he arrived just at the right time. This man had worked for a number of other sculptors. He had in his hands all of the metal arts, whether it was hammering or cutting, and when we had the foundry, we both learned at the same time, but he really taught me my trade. I can remember saying to him, "Joe, I can't get this to do this," and he'd come over and he'd show me how to do it and go back to what he was doing. I'll also mention, because it's a phenomenon that you will appreciate, I hired the man for half-time. His idea was to arrive at noon and to leave at 6 or 7. He did more work in the time he was there. It was really admirable. Anyway, he's remained a friend of mine, but I mentioned that in learning to hammer the way that one has to for this kind of work, I owe that lesson to him. Now, the styrofoam models, this is an example of the model of a piece done in styrofoam, cast in aluminum, and the model then being used to create a sculpture in scale. This is called Woman on a Toboggan. Now, this kind of thing, it's you have the model, you don't have to make a drawing, but it's all done by measuring and enlarging, cutting and welding. And I was very interested already in flat surfaces in that particular piece. Now, this piece, for instance, comes to depart in 4 or 5 elements. As I say, with styrofoam, I began on a route which eventually led me to the machine tool pieces. This is another one of some small pieces done in styrofoam, assembled, cast, and then polished and assembled in aluminum. Woman on the waves. You may notice the flat areas are not really flat, and that will come up in another piece. Now this is, again, it's an example of a small sculpture. It comes apart in several elements using styrofoam, which, as I say, became a very precious auxiliary material. Styrofoam has the capacity of, if you perch something out on the end of it, or you project it out, or you attach something to it, you can glue it, pin it. It doesn't need any armature. If you do the same thing in plaster or wax, it usually, many times, has to have an armature. So it leaves the sculptor very free to conceive the forms he does as he feels them. At least it suited my work absolutely perfectly. This is the piece that led me to the machine tool pieces. Again, you know, sometimes developments in one works come out of very strange incidents. Jim McGee will recognize this piece because he may have worked on this piece or some other, but what really obsessed me with it was the business of filing flat. And filing flat technically is a very difficult thing to do, and very boring and very time consuming. And I was just working on this, like, was at a friend's house for dinner, and I was complaining bitterly about the time it took to make the flat surface. I said, "I'll go out of my mind." And there was a man there at dinner, a friend of my friends, and I had another piece in my studio in styrofoam, and I gave the piece to him. It's called the Tissot Dupont cigarette lighter. This was a man who they have a big factory in Annecy, and they have lots of little small industry providers. He took the styrofoam thing off. They did the piece. No drawing, no nothing. They just had the styrofoam piece, and it intrigued him, and he enjoyed that immensely. And from this piece, I don't know if you can see now. This surface in here, this concave surface, you see that that's concave. Well, on that piece, I learned that you don't do that on machine tool pieces. I show you this because on this piece I learned some of the possibilities that existed for the surfaces. The way the surface takes the light, that surface becomes a part of the vocabulary that the artist is working with.